Hey everyone, welcome back. It's time for another deep dive. And today we're heading over to India.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at their livestock industry.
Okay.
And for this one, we've got like a really fascinating report from the Indian government.
Interesting.
It's called the Basic Animal Husbandry Statistics for 2024.
Okay.
And it's basically like a census,
I see.
but for all their livestock.
Makes sense. So we're talking cows and
Yeah,
chickens and all that.
exactly. Chickens, buffalo, goats, sheep, like the whole crew.
Wow, the whole barnyard.
You name it, it's in there.
That's pretty comprehensive.
And what's really cool is that it doesn't just tell us how many animals there are.
Yeah.
It actually goes way deeper than that and gives us all this data about milk production, egg production, meat production, even wool.
So it's like a snapshot of the entire industry.
Exactly. And it gives us a really good idea of just how important these animals are to India's economy and to their way of life.
And I bet there are some surprises in there.
Oh, definitely. Like, did you know that India is the world's largest milk producer?
Really? I had no idea.
Yeah, it's true. In 2023 to 2024 alone, they produced a whopping 239.30 million tons of milk.
That is a lot of milk. That's incredible. I mean, what are they doing with all that milk?
Well, I'm sure a lot of it goes into making chai, which is like a staple drink in India.
Oh, yeah, of course, chai. I mean, that makes sense. But still, that's a huge amount. Are there certain types of animals that are contributing more to that milk production?
Yeah, actually, the report breaks down milk production by animal. And it turns out buffaloes are like the unsung heroes of the Indian dairy industry.
Really? Buffaloes? More
Yeah.
than cows?
Yeah, they actually contribute more to the total milk production than cows do.
Huh. Interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that. Why is that?
Well, buffalo milk is really popular in India. It's got like a richer flavor and higher fat content.
Oh, okay. So it's like a taste preference thing?
Partly,
Hmm.
but it's also about tradition. Buffaloes have been a part of Indian agriculture for centuries.
Right. So it's like a cultural thing, too.
Exactly. Now, the report also mentions that crossbred cows are becoming increasingly popular.
Crossbred cows. What are those?
So basically, they're cows that have been bred from indigenous Indian breeds and exotic breeds like Holstein Friesians from Europe.
So it's like a mix of the best of both worlds.
Exactly. The idea is to get cows that produce more milk but are still adapted to the Indian climate.
Oh, that's smart. So are these crossbred cows contributing a lot to the overall milk production?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And that's actually one of the reasons why India's milk production is growing every year.
Oh, wow. So it's like a combination of things. The popularity of buffalo milk, these new crossbred cows, and probably some government initiatives too.
Absolutely. The report mentions that milk production increased by 3.78% this year.
That's impressive. What kind of initiatives are they doing?
Well, they have programs to improve animal health and breeding practices, and they're also investing infrastructure like milk collection centers and processing plants.
So it's like a whole system approach.
Exactly. And it seems to be working.
It definitely does. Now, I'm curious about how milk production varies across different regions of India.
Well, luckily, this report has got us covered. It actually maps out milk production by state. And guess what? The top milk-producing state is Uttar Pradesh.
Uttar Pradesh. Interesting. Is that because they have a lot of cows and buffaloes there?
Partly,
Yeah.
but it's also because they have a really strong dairy infrastructure and a lot of government support for the industry.
So it's not just about the number of animals, it's about having the right systems in place.
Exactly. And it's fascinating to see how those systems can vary from state to state.
Yeah, I bet there's a lot of diversity in how milk is produced and consumed across India.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Some states might focus more on buffalo milk, while others might have a preference for cow milk.
Right, and some states might have more small-scale dairy farms, while others have these big commercial operations.
Exactly. It's like a whole tapestry of different approaches.
It really makes you appreciate the complexity of the Indian livestock sector.
Definitely.
Uh,
And speaking of complexity, the report also highlights some states that have per capita milk availability way above the national average.
Per capita milk availability. So that's like how much milk is available per person.
Yeah, exactly. It's a good indicator of how well a state is doing in terms of meeting the demand for milk.
So which states are doing really well?
Well, Punjab is one of them. They have a really high per capita milk availability.
Why is that? What are they doing differently?
Well, it seems like they've really invested in their dairy infrastructure. We have a strong focus on breeding and animal husbandry practices. And they also have a really efficient system for collecting and distributing milk.
So it's like a combination of good policies, good practices, and good infrastructure.
Exactly. It's a recipe for success.
Makes sense.
Hmm.
So we've talked about milk, but what about eggs? Is India a big player in the egg market too?
Oh, yeah. They're actually the second largest egg producer in the world.
Wow. Second only to China.
China.
Yeah.
Okay. Makes sense. So they must be producing a lot of eggs.
They are. In 2023 to 2024, they produced a staggering 142.77 billion eggs.
Billion with a B. That's insane.
Yeah, that's a lot of omelets.
It really is. I mean, what's driving that kind of growth in egg production? Well, for one thing, there's a growing demand for eggs in India. It's a cheap and nutritious source of protein.
Yeah, that makes sense. But it's not just India, right? Global egg production is on the rise.
Absolutely. It's a trend we're seeing all over the world, as people are looking for more affordable and sustainable sources of protein.
So India's just keeping up with the times.
Yeah. But they're also doing some things really well, like they've really embraced modern poultry farming techniques.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
Well, they're using things like climate-controlled poultry sheds, automated feeding systems, and really efficient breeding programs.
So they're really maximizing production.
Exactly. And the report actually compares what they call backyard poultry to commercial production.
Backyard poultry versus commercial production. What's the difference?
So backyard poultry is basically small-scale egg production.
Yeah.
Like families raising a few chickens in their backyard for their own consumption or to sell locally.
Right, I get it. And commercial production is like the big factory farms.
Exactly. Huge operations with thousands of birds.
So which one produces more eggs?
Well, the report shows that commercial production is what's really driving those high egg numbers. But backyard poultry is still really important, especially in rural areas.
Yeah, it probably provides a lot of food security and income for rural families.
Definitely. And it's another example of the diversity of the Indian agricultural landscape. You have these small-scale traditional practices coexisting alongside these massive commercial operations.
It's like a mix of old and new.
Exactly. And it seems like both have their place in the Indian egg industry.
Now, I'm curious about where all these eggs are being produced. Are there certain regions of India that are known for egg production?
Oh, yeah. The report actually highlights Andhra Pradesh as the top egg-producing state.
Andhra Pradesh. Okay. And why is that?
Well, it seems like they have a really favorable climate for poultry farming, and they've also got a lot of government support for the industry.
So it's like a winning combination.
Yeah, and they're followed closely by Telangana and West Bengal.
So those are like the egg hubs of India.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that some states have a really high per capita egg availability.
Like way above the national average.
Yeah, exactly.
I wonder why that is. Is it just about income levels? Or are there other factors at play?
Well, income definitely plays a role, but there are also cultural factors and dietary preferences to consider.
Right. Like some communities might eat more eggs than others.
Exactly. And the availability of other protein sources can also influence egg consumption.
Yeah. So it's like a whole web of interconnected factors.
Definitely. Okay, so we've covered milk and eggs now. Let's talk about meat.
Okay, bring on the meat.
Right, so the report states that India is the 5th largest meat producer globally.
5th largest. Wow. They must be producing a lot of meat.
They are. In 2023 to 2024, their total meat production was 10.25 million tons.
That's a significant amount. And is it growing?
Yeah, it's actually on the rise. Meat consumption in India is increasing.
Why is that?
Well, there are a few factors at play. Population growth is one, rising incomes another, and also changing dietary habits.
So as people have more money, they're eating more meat.
Exactly. Now, what kind of meat are we talking about here? Is it mostly beef?
Actually, no. Poultry is the dominant meat source in India.
Poultry. So chicken.
Yeah, exactly. Chicken is really popular, it's affordable, and it's seen as a healthier option compared to some other meats.
Okay, so chicken is king. But what about other types of meat, like goat or lamb?
Well, those are still significant, but their production isn't as high as poultry.
I see. And I guess that makes sense given the cultural and religious diversity of India.
Exactly. Some communities might avoid certain types of meat for religious reasons.
Right, so it's not just about what's being produced, it's also about what people are actually eating.
Absolutely. And speaking of what people are eating, the report highlights some interesting regional variations in meat production.
Oh, really? Wait,
Well, it turns out West Bengal is the top meat-producing state in India.
West Bengal? Huh, interesting. Why is that?
It seems like they have a really strong livestock industry, and they also have a large population that consumes meat.
Okay, so it's a combination of supply and demand.
Yeah, pretty much. And they're followed by Uttar Pradesh and Maharashtra.
So those are like the meat capitals of India.
You could say that. Now, we've talked about milk, eggs, and meat, but there's one more livestock product we haven't covered yet.
Wool.
Wool, right? I almost forgot about that.
So the report tells us that India produces a significant amount of wool.
How much are we talking?
In 2023 to 2024, they produced 33.69 million kilograms.
That's a lot of sweaters.
It is. And most of that wool comes from Rajasthan.
Rajasthan, okay. Why Rajasthan?
Well, it seems like they have a lot of sheep there.
Makes sense, but is it just the number of sheep, or are there other factors at play?
Well, Rajasthan also has a climate that's well suited for raising sheep,
Hmm.
and they have a long tradition of wool production.
So it's like a cultural thing, too.
Exactly. Now, the report mentions that wool production in India has been a bit inconsistent.
Oh, really? Like up and down?
Yeah, it's not as steady as milk or egg production.
I wonder why that is. Is it because of market fluctuations?
Well, that's definitely part of it. But there are also other factors like weather patterns and the availability of grazing land for sheep.
So it's like a lot of things can affect wool production.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance.
It sounds like it. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about milk, eggs, meat, and wool. It's amazing how diverse the Indian livestock sector is.
It really is. And we've only just scratched the surface.
I know. There's so much more to explore in this report.
Well, luckily we've got more time, so let's dive back in and see what other insights we can uncover.
Sounds good. I'm ready for more.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so we've looked at the big picture, like total milk production, total egg production, but I'm curious about some of the specifics. Like when it comes to cows, are there big differences between like the native breeds and the more, exotic or crossbred cows?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like if you look at the milk yields, it's pretty clear that the exotic and crossbred cows, they're producing way more milk on average.
That makes sense. I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of the point of crossbreeding, right?
Exactly. It's all about boosting those yields. But, it's not just about quantity. The indigenous breeds, they've got their own advantages too.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, they've adapted to the local climate over centuries. They might not produce as much milk, but they're often more resistant to diseases and they can handle the heat better.
So it's like a trade-off.
Yeah, kind of like, choosing between a sprinter and a marathon runner.
I like that analogy. So
Yeah.
it's like you want the high yielders, but you also need the ones who can go the distance.
Exactly. And, there's a bigger issue here too. Like losing those indigenous breeds could mean losing valuable genetic diversity.
Oh, I see. So it's about preserving those unique traits that might be important down the line.
Exactly. Like what if there's a new disease or the climate changes even more? Those indigenous breeds, they might have the genes we need to adapt.
That's a really good point. So it's not just about milk today. It's about making sure the dairy industry is sustainable in the long run.
Exactly. All right, so we've talked cows. Let's move on to buffaloes. We mentioned earlier that they're the champions of milk production in India.
Right? Like they actually produce more milk than cows overall.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. And the report gives us some data on their yields too. Like Punjab stands out with an average of 10.83 kilograms per buffalo per day.
Wow. That's impressive.
Yeah.
What's their secret?
Well, it seems like they've got some really successful breeding programs going on, and they're also really good at animal husbandry, like taking care of the animal.
So it's a combination of genetics and good management.
Exactly. And what's cool is that those best practices, they can be shared with other states too.
Yeah. Like what works in Punjab could potentially work elsewhere.
Exactly. All right, let's switch gears a bit and talk about goats.
Goats. Okay. I'm intrigued. What's the story there?
Well, the report shows that the number of goats in milk has been increasing across many states.
Huh. Interesting. I wouldn't have thought of goats as major milk producers.
Yeah, they're not on the same level as cows or buffaloes, but goat milk is an important part of the diet in certain regions, and it's also used to make different dairy products like cheese and yogurt. Oh, okay. So maybe that's why the goat population is growing, because the demand for those products is increasing.
Yeah, that's a good possibility. It's fascinating how these livestock numbers can tell us so much about people's diets and preferences.
Like a window into what people are eating and drinking.
Exactly. And it shows how these trends are constantly shifting and evolving.
Okay, let's talk about meat production now. We know that poultry is the dominant meat source in India.
Right. It's huge.
Mm.
But I'm curious about what happened to the more traditional practices of animal slaughter for meat. Did those decline as poultry farming rose?
That's a good question. And the report actually gives us some insights into that. It turns out that both sectors are kind of coexisting.
So it's not like one replaced the other?
No,
Not really.
it seems more like they're catering to different demands and preferences.
That makes sense. I mean, India has such a diverse population with a wide range of dietary habits.
Exactly. So some people might prefer poultry while others stick to more traditional meats.
And the availability of different types of meat probably influences those choices too. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so the report gives us a breakdown of meat production by species. And it really highlights how dominant poultry is. Like it accounts for the vast majority of meat produced.
That's not surprising given how efficient and affordable poultry production is.
Right. But it's important to remember that it's not just about the numbers. There are also cultural and social factors at play.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked about milk, eggs, meat. Now let's circle back to wool for a moment.
Ooh, okay. We talk about Rajasthan being the top wool producer, but the report mentioned some fluctuations in their output.
Yeah, those fluctuations are pretty common in the wool industry.
Oh, really? Like, why is that?
Well, a lot of things can affect wool production. Weather patterns are a big one.
Oh, right. Like the drought could affect the grazing land for sheep.
Exactly. And then there's the availability of grazing land in general.
Okay, so it's like a lot of external factors can influence wool production.
Yeah, it's a complex system. And then there's market demand too. Like if the demand for wool goes down, that can impact production as well.
So it's like a balancing act.
It is. And it's interesting how these different livestock sectors, they all face their own unique challenges.
Yeah, like what works for milk production might not work for wool production.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that the livestock industry is constantly evolving and adapting.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about the production side of things, but I'm also curious about the economic impact of the livestock sector in India.
Oh, yeah. It's huge. Livestock rearing is a major source of income and employment, especially in rural areas.
Right. It's like a lifeline for millions of people.
Exactly. And the report highlights that. It talks about how the sector contributes to GDP growth and job creation.
So it's not just about food and fiber. It's a key part of the Indian economy.
Absolutely. And you know what else I found really interesting in the report? It talked about the role of women in the livestock sector.
Oh, yeah.
It mentioned that a lot of rural women are involved in livestock rearing.
Yeah. It's a really important source of income and empowerment for women.
That's awesome. So it's like these statistics, they're not just numbers. They're about people's lives and livelihoods. Exactly. And it makes you appreciate the human side of this industry.
Okay, so the report also talks about the history of the livestock sector in India, like how it's evolved over time.
Yeah, it mentions this really interesting program called Operation Flood.
Operation Flood. What was that?
So it was this massive initiative back in the 1970s and 80s that completely transformed milk production in India.
Really? How so?
Well, it focused on creating these dairy cooperatives
Wow.
where farmers would pool their milk and sell it collectively.
Oh, interesting. So it's like a way to empower small-scale farmers.
Exactly. And it also helped to improve the quality and distribution of milk.
Wow. So it sounds like a really successful program.
It was. It's considered one of the biggest dairy development programs in the world.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And the report also mentions a more recent shift, the delicensing of the dairy sector in 2002.
Right. So before that, the government had a lot of control over the dairy industry, but then they decided to open it up to private investment.
And what was the goal of that?
Well, the idea was to boost competition and innovation in the sector.
So it's like they were trying to create a more market-driven approach.
Exactly. And it seems to have worked. Like India is now the world's largest milk producer.
That's impressive. So it's like a combination of those early public initiatives like Operation Flood and then this later move towards liberalization.
Yeah, it's an interesting mix. And, the report also talks about India's growing presence in the global livestock market.
Oh, right. Like they're becoming a major exporter of livestock products.
Exactly. And they're expanding into new markets all over the world.
That's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
But I imagine there are also some challenges that come with that.
Oh, definitely. Like meeting international quality standards, ensuring ethical production practices, and navigating all the complexities of global trade.
So it's not always easy.
No. But the report seems optimistic about India's potential for growth in this area.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
So it sounds like the Indian livestock sector is on an upward trajectory.
It does. And, it's fascinating how this one report can give us such a comprehensive view of this complex and dynamic industry.
It really is like a treasure trove of information.
And it's a reminder that data can be a really powerful tool for understanding and shaping the world around us.
It's amazing how much we've learned just from diving into this one report.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It really shows you the power of data.
Yeah, like it's not just numbers. It's like a whole story unfolding.
Exactly. It gives you a framework for thinking about the livestock industry in India.
Yeah, what I find really impressive is just how thorough it is. Like they've collected data on everything.
Oh, yeah. It's incredibly comprehensive, like from animal populations and yields to, like you said, regional variations and the economic contributions.
It goes even deeper than that.
Oh, absolutely. It gets into things like breeding practices and animal health and the social and economic impact of livestock rearing on different communities.
It's like they've thought of everything.
They really have. And that's what makes it so valuable. Like, it's not just a bunch of statistics. It's a tool for understanding a really complex system.
Right. And for making informed decisions about the future of the industry.
Exactly. Now, speaking of data collection, I noticed that the report talks about how they've shifted from traditional census-based approaches to something called the integrated sample survey.
Oh, yeah, I saw that too. What's that all about?
Well, in the past, they used to try and count every single animal, which was time-consuming and, prone to errors.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, India has a lot of livestock.
It does. So this new system, it uses statistical methods to select a representative sample of farms and households.
So it's like a more targeted approach.
Exactly. And it allows them to collect more detailed data more frequently.
So it's like a win-win situation. You
Yeah.
get better data and you save time and resources.
Precisely. And it means they can track trends more effectively and identify emerging issues.
That's really important. And it's not just national level data either, right?
No, they break it down by state for almost every metric.
Which is really cool because it shows how diverse the livestock sector is across India.
Exactly. Like what works in one state might not work in another. So
Yeah.
having that granular data is really important for policymaking.
It's like giving each state its own customized toolkit.
Exactly. And that kind of data-driven approach is becoming even more crucial as the industry faces new challenges like climate change and resource scarcity.
Right. The report also mentioned a commitment to continuous improvement in data collection methods. Like there's something called the Technical Committee of Direction.
Oh, yeah, that's a really important group. They're constantly evaluating the integrated sample survey and recommending improvements.
So it's like they're always striving to make the data even better.
Exactly. And it's not just government agencies involved either. They emphasize collaboration with researchers and universities and even private organizations.
So it's a truly collaborative effort.
It is, and that's what makes it so effective. Like they're bringing together all these different perspectives and expertise.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I'm really struck by just how vital the livestock sector is to India.
It's true. It's a huge part of their economy and their culture.
And it's so complex and constantly changing.
It is. But this report gives us such a valuable window into that world.
Yeah, it's like a roadmap for understanding the challenges and opportunities facing the industry.
And it highlights the importance of data in making informed decisions about the future.
Well said. Yep. So listeners, if you ever get the chance to check out this report, I highly recommend it.
It's fascinating stuff. And
Yeah.
even if you don't dive into the whole thing, just remember that there's a whole world behind the food we eat and the clothes we wear.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
So the next time you're enjoying a glass of milk or an omelet, or even just wearing a wool sweater, take a moment to appreciate the work that went into producing it.
And the people and animals who are part of that story.
Absolutely. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
And we'll catch you next time for another fascinating exploration.